You tonight, and I'm not going to fill a whole lot of time. Well, hopefully his car will be barreling down Highway 27 as we speak. But I do want to thank Barbaralee for organizing this event. And I also, of course, want to thank our funders who helped make this possible, including Dorothy Lichtenstein and JP Morgan Chase and the New York State Council on the Arts, all of whom helped our program. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the staff here at the parish who've done such a great job of organizing an event like this in a space that's not really engineered for these types of presentations. Many of you know this building quite well and know that there is generally a concert hall in the back where we do these kinds of programs. You might also know that that program has to come here because the concert hall has been turned into a depot and vault for the preparation of the move to the new building on Montauk Highway in Watermill. So everything is packed and wrapped and ready to go. And the screens from the vault have been moved into the new building. And we're working away, and we will be open to the public on the 10th of November. We're very excited about that. And we'll have lots of programs, as well as being able to put our permanent collection on view for the first time in the history of this museum, as well as special exhibitions like Landmarks of New York and Adam Bartos' photographs, and many other things, as well as lectures and performances and music and fashion. And we have a cafe that will be run by the Art of Eating, some of you might know, all meant to celebrate the creative legacy of the East End of Long Island and how that legacy has reverberated throughout the world. So we're very proud of what we've accomplished. We will, of course, only be 2.8 miles away from the center of the village. So we hope that you will continue to support us and be our members and our friends. And I would say that for those of you who are not currently members of the Parrish Art Museum, we will be having preview days prior to the opening of the museum to the public on the 10th. So if you would like to come when it might be a little calmer, between the 4th and the 9th of November, it will be preview days for members, and the higher up in the food chain you are, the more exclusive your preview will be. There's plenty of information on how to be a member at the front desk, and we would very much welcome you. It does take a village and a town to make a success of the museum. I think that the services that we'll be providing for the museum will be something that you will definitely appreciate and want to be a part of. I do want to tell you that we have a couple of other programs that will continue to happen on Job's Lane even after these exhibitions go, which will happen right after Labor Day. And those of you who know about Parish Presents, our big fundraising event that happens on the Thanksgiving weekend, that will be taking place here on Job's Lane, and that will be our final program here. We'll also be doing one of our famous Pechacucha Hamptons programs. It might be a road show. We're not quite sure where it's going to be yet. So again, if you aren't a member, you might want to join so you can find out where that special program will be. And I'm going to say a few words about Barbaralee, and then we have a special message for her from the mayor. Well, the body isn't cold yet, so just do want to, those of you all, I'm sure, know Barbaralee well, but I just so enjoy listing her accomplishments. She has served as a leading voice for some of the most defining moments of urban issues of our time, and especially historic preservation. I just have to read the verse. She is the chairperson of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center. She is vice chair of the New York State Council on the Arts. She's a director of the Trust for the National Mall in Washington, D.C. She was the first director of the Office of Cultural Affairs in New York City. She is the longest-serving commissioner of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Committee and the first woman vice chair in more than 100-year history of the New York Commission on the Fine Arts. I feel like I should have an accordion that rolls it down, but those are some of her primary accomplishments. So now we'll have a little message from the mayor, who I believe has something special for you, Barbaralee.
David Rockwell just walked in too, so.
Yeah, I kept talking, something good would happen.
Hey, David. as the Parish Art Museum constructs their museum outside of the village of Southampton, and we wish them much success. After 115 years of occupancy of this building, in January 1st of 2013, the village takes over operations of this place. So you might say, what are we going to do here, right? And so we put together a committee of people to study this building here. We're going to do, it's a three-part piece. And I have Whitney Steve. I have to recognize Whitney, who's been part of my founders board. Whitney, and also C-Mac Sammy, who's part of the founders group and the chair of the planning commission. There's three things that we're going to do here. One is restoration of this 115-year-old building. It was built in really four stages. The first part was built in the middle area, was built in 1897. The back auditorium area was built in 1903. The area we're sitting in right now was built in 1913. And there were a couple of additions made in the 1950s and the 1970s. We've engaged an architecture firm, McCarty and Sobetti, to help us in a restoration program to bring it back to its original beauty. And we're going to create a lot of programming within here. The second piece, and I'm glad David Rockwell's here, we engaged the Rockwell group to help us. C-Mac, you want to grab one? C-Mac, grab one of those. Sorry.
He's going to tell us about it.
Okay, he's going to tell us about it. But I'm going to brag about the Rockwell group a little bit. And
No, he's going to do that.
you can do that too. But the Rockwell group, under David's direction, helped us on a pro bono basis to design a pavilion for the outdoor. It's basically it's a 300-seat pavilion.
Hold it higher.
I'm going to show another image.
Yeah, he's going to show a couple of images and talk about this. So I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but the reality is that the Rockwell group did this on a pro bono basis to work with the village of Southampton, because the reality, we are taking this building in January. We cannot afford to maintain a dormant site here. And we recognize the need to do outdoor theater, outdoor performances, and working with the Rockwell group and David and his crew, we created this. These will be on a wall, and you can look at them as you're leaving. And one of the pieces I think that the year-round resident likes is that it's designed to do a lot of entertainment in the summertime, but in the wintertime, the floor comes up and it becomes an ice skating rink. So it's a great community. It becomes a destination point. The landmarks of New York exhibit here with Barbaralee, and she came and she brought it to our attention in the village and said we want to do this. And I've got something that she thought would be a fantastic transition as for the summertime, because Parish didn't really know when their exit point would be out of this building. We didn't know what was going to happen, and Barbaralee came and said, I've got this incredible exhibit and I want to engage a series of lectures, and I have a proclamation for you, Barbaralee, and I'm going to read this. Whereas Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel's Landmarks of New York exhibition at the Parrish Art Museum during the summer of 2012 has been a success. Her passion for preservation is reflected in a lifetime of achievements as a writer, activist, television interviewer, and producer. She has authored 19 books and curated 7 international museum exhibits. Whereas Dr. Diamonstein-Spielvogel's book, The Landmarks of New York, chronologically arranges by date of construction a detailed description with photographs of 1,276 individual landmarks in 102 historic districts. Whereas she has served in many public capacities, including Director of Cultural Affairs in New York City, appointed to the Board of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum by President Ronald Reagan, appointed to the United States Commission of Fine Arts by President Bill Clinton, and served as their first female vice chair in its 100-year history, and recently appointed by President Barack Obama as Commissioner of the American Battle Monuments Commission. She was the longest-serving Landmarks Commissioner, having served under 4 New York City mayors from 1972 to 1987. She's currently the chair of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center and the Vice Chair of the New York State Council of the Arts. Whereas she has been a driving force behind the summer of 2012 exhibit at the Parrish Art Museum and coordinated not only the exhibit but also the lecture series, which included moderating a panel discussion of award-winning architects discussing the future of the past, and other Thursday evening discussions with Gillian Tett, managing editor of the Financial Times, the United States edition, Joshua David and Robert Hammond, co-founders of the Friends of the Highline, architect Robert A.M. Stern, Dean of the Yale School of Architecture, and the architect David Rockwell, world-renowned designer and producer. Therefore, be it resolved that I, Mark Epplin, on behalf of the Board of Trustees and all the citizens of our village, do hereby offer our gratitude to Dr. Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel for her leadership and support during the transition of the historic building located at 25 Jones Lane in the village of Southampton, for being an integral part of this incredible community.
Thank you for this nice surprise, this altogether unnecessary but very much appreciated recognition. It was a pleasure for me, and I hope this is the beginning of many events in this building that will involve you and the village and the Parish Museum. I would like to say welcome to David, but before I do, if you recall, I invited you to participate before the village discovered you. So I'm glad that we have mutual concerns and taste. The discussion and the conversation this evening is entitled Untold Stories from an Eclectic, Exceptional Practice, and that it is. Our speaker encourages questions from the audience, so at the end of this presentation, you will have a chance to ask some questions of your own. So please take a card. Are they being passed around? Were they on your seats? Yes. And I'm going to, after I introduce David, sit there and someone will pass the cards to me. So please take one if you don't have one. Write down your focused and friendly question, and they will be collected and then passed to me. And now let us begin. You've gotten a little preview, thanks to the mayor, some of the eclectic, exceptional practice of David Rockwell. He is an architect, a set and interior designer, a producer, an author, and founder and CEO of the Rockwell Group, an award-winning, cross-disciplinary architecture and design practice of more than 130 architects, designers, and artists in New York and Madrid. Their projects include hotels, restaurants, spas, theaters, set designs, museums, playgrounds, and even the public spaces at the JetBlue airline terminal at JFK. Projects that have been created in 21 countries around the world. The son of a vaudeville dancer and a choreographer, David Rockwell grew up doing community theater on the New Jersey shore. Eventually, his family moved to Mexico, which is said to have been a very strong influence on his work. After graduating from Syracuse University, he attended the Art Associate, AA in London, and then made his way back to New York and found work with a Broadway lighting designer. And as you will hear, the theater has always been influential to his work. He has designed sets for numerous Broadway shows, including the musicals Hairspray, which won him a Tony nomination, To Catch a Thief, Legally Blonde, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and most recently, Harvey. He is also the designer and co-producer of the forthcoming musical, Houdini, with book by Aaron Sorkin and sets by David Rockwell and starring Hugh Jackman. He has designed sets for the Oscar ceremonies in Los Angeles in 2009 and 2010, as well as a grill for Viking, wallpaper, rugs, seating, outdoor furniture, and as you've heard, very close to home, where we are meeting tonight, he's created an outdoor, flexible, and as he describes it, demountable, open-air, tent-like pavilion for all kinds of celebrations and events, which it is said will be completed by next summer. Verbal contracts are binding. We all saw him nod his head. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to David Rockwell.
I'm pretty certain the completion of the pavilion will be more punctual than I was tonight. The traffic was more intense than I planned. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's a beautiful show. And I look around and see so many of the spaces that made me fall in love with New York to begin with. And so thank you for that generous introduction. And in fact, one of the things I'm going to talk a bit about are my personal passions. And as Barbaralee mentioned, as a kid, I was brought up in and around the community theater. That is me. In my mother's production of The King and I, which I remember being much more glorious than it was, but that's the way memory works, of course. I grew up loving the idea of building and making. When I was 12, I came to New York and saw my first Broadway production, and I imagine some of you know what that production is. It's Fiddler on the Roof, designed by Boris Aronson, and directed and choreographed by Jerome Robbins. And on the bottom, I have some of the influences, but what was interesting as a 12-year-old, I didn't know any of this. I knew I was hypnotized by movement and dance and design. And there was something about storytelling that compelled me. On the far right is a model. There was a recent revival within the last 4 or 5 years of Fiddler on the Roof starring Alfred Molina. And I was approached to design it. And Boris Aronson's widow, Lisa Aronson, Boris is deceased, but his widow, who has become a friend of mine, is a kind of advisor. And I said to her, should I do this? Should I take on designing the show that was the thing that got me into design to begin with? And she said, sure, worst comes to worst, it'll be a disaster. Why not do it? So I designed it, the director was fired, and I never had to do it. So I got the pleasure of doing it, but with none of the displeasure of it being a disaster. As mentioned, when I was 12, right after coming to New York, we moved to Mexico. And as an architect, I think it's interesting to think about what forms your vocabulary. And I was very, very influenced by the quality of light, the sense of movement, the sense of spectacle. And that propelled me into thinking about design. This was my first year at Syracuse University, and I brought a little bit of Mexico with me, with the sandals and the hammock. And actually, one of the projects was to create a small cubicle, and I decided that a hammock would remind me of Guadalajara. And many, many years later, we now are in a space on Union Square and dealing with the same issues and the same ideas that interested me as a kid. And that is the ability for design to bring people together, and the ability of design to kind of create a compelling environment. And interestingly, I think the thing that I found architecture school didn't really encourage was not the study of just one building, but the study of the human experience that connects buildings. So that became my personal passion. We're a studio of about 180 people, architects, interior designers, product designers, set designers. There's some people, I don't know what they do, writers. And if you were to walk around our studio, you would find that we dream big. So I wanted to start out looking at 3 or 4 projects that are in the category of what if. What if you could create an 1,800-seat theater like the Old Globe that could be portable? This was a commission by the Building Museum in DC. They created an exhibit based on the Old Globe. And this theater is totally built out of scaffolding. And it has the sort of thrill of the theater coming to town. I think it's critical that, that you pursue the things you're most excited about, most passionate about. And in some cases, you have to make those commissions. You don't wait for the phone to ring. So this is a project that, if any of you are interested in an 1,800-seat portable theater, let me know. But you can see one of the things about it is, like the Old Globe, it's not just about the performance, it's about the full day. And as the performance begins, these screen pieces would rotate. What if you, and this was when New York was trying to decide whether the football team was going to be in New Jersey or in New York. I live in Tribeca. We would have been so inconvenienced by the stadium being on the west side. But I thought it was an interesting idea, and so this is a proposal saying, what if you could put the basketball arena on top of the football stadium? What if you decided to go even denser than normal? It was an interesting thing for us in thinking about complexity and density. What if you could have a park that could move around and float? As we showed here, and this was a proposal that we did with Diller Scofidio Rentro for the east side. You see the seaport right off of that orange building. And obviously somewhat inspired by Venice, but also inspired by the ability for things to move. Or what if, and this was a piece that we did for the New York Times, thinking about Times Square in 2050, what if the signs were in fact inhabitable, and what if you could create a living room right in the middle of Times Square? And this was done long before the amazing move by the Bloomberg administration to actually make Times Square a pedestrian place, which is kind of phenomenal. So, thinking of what if, I want to look at 5 different influences in our work, and the first is theater. So, I think what's interesting about theater is that, in fact, some of the things that make the deepest impression on us are the things that don't last very long. Every time you go and see a piece of theater, it's not the same the next time. It's by its nature ephemeral. These were the sets for Hairspray, and it was an incredible godsend that I got invited to do this. And I went to Baltimore with John Waters. How many of you know the film Hairspray? So I went to Baltimore with John Waters because I wanted to see his version of Baltimore. We turned into a very seedy street, and he looked at me and he said, the important thing is that you laugh with them, not at them. I said, okay. And we started to understand that the key to this story was this was a chubby girl from Baltimore who believed she was going to integrate the world and change the world, and she did. So it was a kind of Cinderella story. It was also one of the first uses on Broadway of LED. So all of those pieces on the back that you see are inspired by a toy from the 60s called Light Bright, if any of you remember that. You put the pegs in the thing. And we found an available architectural fixture and then essentially vacuum formed a Tupperware piece that went on top of it to create these big pegs. And it was an extraordinary experience for me. Barbaralee mentioned that we did the Oscars. The interesting thing is, 14 years ago, as an architect, I was commissioned to do the Kodak Theater, home of the Oscars. And I knew from speaking to the Academy that what they wanted was a theater that would translate the magic of the Oscars to a TV audience with the minimum amount of technology visible. In other words, you wanted to translate the live experience on TV. So I did that as a kind of you know, an outsider. I didn't know much about the Academy Awards. I went once or twice to see them, to research it. And then, in a strange, surprising move, I was invited in 2009 to design the Oscars by Bill Condon, who's an amazing film director. And I said to him, don't people watch the Oscars really to say how crappy it looks? Isn't it a kind of blood sport? And he said, that's true, but that's the opportunity. And I realized that if I were designing something, I wanted to redesign the theater. So we proposed ripping out 600 seats in the orchestra of the theater and essentially creating a set where the audience and the performers were in the same set. That what you were watching the Oscars for is to see reactions. You wanted to see community. You wanted to see a relationship. And, you know, it was one of those truly near-death experiences because the Academy essentially allows a producer to do whatever they suggest. So here you see 600 new seats, new platforms, a curtain of about 1 million Swarovski crystals, and they allowed us to do this. And about 3 weeks before the show, one of the people from the Academy said, what if the seats are uncomfortable? And I said, well, we'll know in about 3 weeks, won't we? But it was an extraordinary experience, and you're about to see the final look here. And I guess the takeaway is if you're doing a theater, you should have to design sets that at least once to understand how to use the theater. And I will bring that experience to this pavilion, I promise. This is a very, very simple set for The Normal Heart. It was a play from 1985 about AIDS, and we were approached by George Wolfe to do the revival, and we had about 5 weeks to do it. They did a reading. The reading was a big hit. It was a very compressed period of time, and incredibly simple set, about 6,000 individual raised letters that look at all of the writing that was going on. Remember, this was before AIDS was called AIDS. This was a kind of very early stage play about the HIV epidemic and the devastating effect on people. And the people were the star of the show. We used projections, we used 3 simple walls, and it was a kind of installation art or a monument to the people we've lost to AIDS. So theater is one idea that fuels our work. Communal spaces, I think most of us who live in cities live there because we love the kind of casual encounter and the fact that the city is an amazing amalgam of different experiences. These are all restaurants over the last 26 years that we've done in New York. And New York's funny because I think outsiders think of New York as the tall buildings, and from the air, it's a very clear grid. But when you're on the ground, it's much messier, it's much more vital, and that's the New York that engaged me as a designer. We pursued doing an airport for 4 or 5 years before we got the opportunity. And I think, you know, I spent a lot of time in airports, and I wondered why they were so counterintuitive. Why it is that the sign never made any sense in terms of where you were moving. And so with JetBlue, we proposed bringing in a choreographer. We brought in Jerry Mitchell, who had been the choreographer on Hairspray. And if you want to see a strange look, tell the CEO of JetBlue you want a choreographer to co-design the terminal with you. But as we got into it with them, we started to understand that if you could create a terminal that intuitively moved people to the outer gates, and then once you got past security, past this blue wall, it refers to a number of kind of iconic New York spaces, door stoops, for instance, the steps that you see where you can sit and grab a cup of coffee. All of the retail is a kind of marketplace around this, and that center ring is a kind of nod to the beautiful Serenade terminal that sits right next to this. And that ring has software we developed that allows JetBlue to change images in real time. We recently completed a hotel on 42nd and 10th called Yotel. It's a pod hotel, meaning the rooms are about 170 square feet, but it means there's a lot of communal space. There's 20,000 square feet of kind of amazing roof deck and interior space, and that space changes every day, including a restaurant that has a series of platforms that raise and lower like tatami rooms, curtains that pull and close. So it creates a public space that's curatable like a theater, and for a hotel where the rooms are small, all the action happens in those spaces. Storytelling, I think, is at the core of all great design. And we have had a real privileged relationship with Nobu since '94, when Nobu first came to New York and partnered with Robert De Niro and Drew Naporin. And actually, 2 years before that, Nobu participated in a Meals on Wheels event called the Feast of the Many Moons. And I was designing that event as a board member for Meals on Wheels. And I tasted Nobu's food. It was incredible. And I pursued Drew. We eventually got the commission. And I was intrigued to speak to Nobu because he wanted to make sure that his Japanese food was acknowledged as being something special. He had spent a lot of time in South America. He used a lot of South American street foods, Peruvian chili paste. He was from the countryside. There were all of these clues that we used to build up the vocabulary of the first restaurant, which is in Tribeca. Even in, you know, I think many cases, a lot of the storytelling doesn't have to translate literally so that an audience or a guest there gets it, but it was a great opportunity to interview Drew and Nobu and extract a kind of script. We've done 19 Nobu since then. In each case, we create materials that relate locally. When we did Nobu 57th Street, if any of you have been to that, that was many, many years later. The original Nobu was, I think, $600,000. Nobu 57th Street was $12 million. By then, you could get the blackened cod at any deli. The river rocks that we used in the original Nobu have become kind of ubiquitous with Asian fusion. So it pushed us into thinking about how do you take the same ideas but push those forward. The first ground up Nobu is in Doha, off of the Four Seasons. I don't know what the budget is, but it's more than 12 million. And the river rocks that we use in the original Nobu now appear as a curtain wall, so we use them as a continuous exterior on the outside of the building that you see there. And that opens next year. And you're all invited. Talking about storytelling, it's interesting when you look at hotels, some of the smallest details of things that matter the most. Like, how annoying is it to be in a hotel room where you can't actually read in the bed? Or to be in a hotel room where you have to get up. What about one of those things that controls the shade, the temperature, and the lights, and no matter what you press, the jacuzzi goes on or something good? So we try and have a very specific point of view when we design a hotel. When we did the Union Square W, it was the third W. We did the first one on 49th, and we can actually see this from our office. And I felt like Union Square should be the inspiration for the hotel. And so we created a design that brings the hotel inside. And in some ways, I realize this is a kind of slight nod to Morris Lapidus, in that stair only goes to one room. There's a ballroom up there. So the stair is not proportional to what it accesses, like the stair on the Fontainebleau that just is there for show. So we looked at when this building was built, a sense of fashion. Most of the shapes you see are slightly corseted, a minimum amount of ornament, mother of pearl ornament in small places. You can see in between the wood check-in, there's mother of pearl peeking out. And then a lobby that's alive with plants, including these live columns. That's a direct reference to the park. Recently, we completed the W in Paris. About 90 rooms. It's right across the street from the Opera House. And it's a smaller version, much smaller version of the Flatiron building. It's a wedge-shaped building. The core is visible no matter where you go. So we wrap the core in black lacquered metal with fiber optic lighting as a kind of acknowledgement of the sparkle of the Paris Opera House. And wherever you go, you're aware of this kind of energy of the core that we call the spark. And you'll see it in a second in the main spaces. And so throughout the day, the hotel is constantly changing, but this core that relates to the Paris Opera House is visible. Craft, I think, is extraordinarily important in that now that things can be manufactured so they're all identical, the value of seeing something where you reveal the artist's hand is even more important. Probably the most extreme example of local that we've ever done is this project that opened 2 or 3 months ago in Beacon called Roundhouse. And it sits on a beautiful waterfall. It's opening in phases. It's a restaurant and a bed and breakfast. It will soon be an event space. And 85% of everything you see is built within a 10-minute walk from this place. So with the owners, we reached out to glass artists, wood artists, furniture artists, metal artists. So it is local on an incredible level. And I was recently up there for a tour, and all of the people who helped build it were there. And you realize that, and it was the owner's idea to do this, the genius of that idea is all of the community in Beacon perceived this as part of Beacon. It's not some alien thing that landed. We last year had the pleasure of working with Jim Thompson, a legendary fabric house, to develop a line of fabrics. And it was really one simple idea, and that was every fabric we wanted to deal with light and reflected light. So cut velvet, nylon, every fabric that they used, we reinterpreted as some reflection of light. And that was a great opportunity for us to learn from a master. So we learned from them, and we brought them our own point of view. The last example of craft I'm going to show is a series over the last 12 years. I've been the chairman of DIFA, which is Design Industry Foundation Fighting AIDS. And for the last 15 years, I participated in something called Dining by Design, where 40 or 50 designers each create a tabletop. And John Waters was there one year and called it the Cannes Film Festival tabletop. It's a kind of amazing thing for my studio to be involved in this, because the office makes these tables. This was one of the simple years where we essentially had a white room, and every seat had a little frame, and you'd be able to take pictures and see the pictures on that frame, digital. This was a year where we were inspired by the movies and had a crystal curtain with a projection screen behind it. And my favorite year was the year we had our office knit every part of the table. And we had those knitting needles made a kind of electronic sound. We made all of our guests, we had Richard Meyer and Julie Taymor talk about strange bedfellows. But we had them there with hand-knitted booties on, so they wouldn't destroy the fabric. But I think what's interesting about it is the design industry works together to raise money for people who need money with AIDS, and what we provide is creativity. So it's a chance for the design industry to come together and do something quite powerful. Transformation. I actually think the reason I love theater sets is because they're about movement. Buildings don't move. It's hard to find a building where you can create something that soars and changes and rotates. But I think there's something about transformation that is deeply human. It acknowledges change. And I've been obsessed with it, and we recently formed a group called The Lab at Rockwell Group. And here you're seeing the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas, where 400 monitors behind two-way mirror create a constantly changing environment. And I think that the reason for that is the idea of Las Vegas is so much more interesting than the reality. You know, the promise of it is wonderful, but then you get there and it's not as magical as you'd expect. And we wanted to create a place that every time you came back was changing. These images are all created in real time by software, meaning you're never going to see the same bubble, and they're also interactive. Have any of you been to New York Film Society at Lincoln Center? So it's the smallest constituent of Lincoln Center. And we were commissioned before they found a space. So we looked at many spaces. The challenge with this space is off of 65th Street, you had to go deep enough in and down to get the ceiling height for screening rooms. So that was a challenge, and in thinking about the program, what we ultimately developed is a space with an amphitheater. How am I doing time-wise here? Move it along. An amphitheater dead center, and that amphitheater could, as you will see, open up during the day and be a lobby, or close at night and be a screening room. So it was a space that wasn't part of the program. Why is an architect doing a food festival? Why not? This was a great Googa Mooga festival in Brooklyn. Did anyone go to that? Good, because it was hard to get food. The great Googa Mooga. So it was the Bonnaroo people creating a food festival, and we designed all of it as individual pieces. So now we get to this pavilion. Portable. We actually are focusing on portable structures in every area. This is demountable, but not portable. And what we tried to do was create a piece that would be appropriate while this building is under renovation, but also be wonderful when it's complete, and that is multi-purpose. It's about 300 feet in diameter, about 35 feet tall. It can seat 300 people inside, but because it has curtains on two sides, it can also open up. You can have an outdoor screening. You can have a screening with an event. And it sits on a platform with a series of steps, so that during the day it's a kind of folly that you can look at. And we're very excited about it. This is a portable cooking school for Jamie Oliver. And the key idea here is that when you cook this meal, you cook it as a group, and then you rearrange all of the cooking elements and you celebrate and eat together. The last project I'm going to show is perhaps the nearest and dearest to my heart, and it's called Imagination Playground. It was a proactive project that began in about 2002, 2003. We spent 5 years researching playgrounds, and this was a pro bono project with the city. And in fact, the project was so successful, we created portable playgrounds. And there's about 500 portable playgrounds used around the world right now. And I'm going to end with a little 2-minute film that shows a play date and how kids use this. Totally unprompted. These are just kids playing. And the idea is it's child-directed. play in which kids get a chance to create their own world.
Look at this. I don't know what it is. We can do anything as long as we work together. Oh, I got an idea with this. You put it together, push it in. Do you need any more of these? Yeah. Find more. Daddy, that's more dominoes. We need a block with a hole. Where you want me to put it? Come on, Amir. We have to drive to Candyland. We have so much fun in this playground, and we can make stuff. We get to dream, and everything we dream will come true. It's important to have a lot of fun. When we use our imagination, anything can happen. Yeah. It's a TV. See?
There's about 150 different pieces, and kids are empowered to create their own kinds of worlds. And it ties directly back to the earliest influences for me in community theater, although in this case they're foam blocks. And it's been an amazing experience, and it's going to be at the Architecture Biennale this year. It was selected to be part of the American Pavilion, and for the first time we're going to let grown-ups play with it. So if you go to Venice, thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for that interesting tour de force of all your work. It was interesting, and you contributed on a very note. What did that last child say? With imagination, you can accomplish anything. Almost anything. Now, are there any questions that have been passed forward? Will someone, Andrea, can you collect them and pass them forward? If you have one,
Someone's saying you can't hear, so talk louder.
I will. And slip away here.
I'll just say, as this question comes up, we did a test play date in Brownsville, which is one of the poorest communities in New York, and they were grateful to have the playground, and someone from the community got up and said, "Can you create an imagination bank?"
Well, will you hold your question up, and someone will collect it from you? And let's start with this one. Was the floating park you worked on with Diller, Scafidio, and Renfro influenced by Robert Smithson's Floating Island, realized in 2005 by Minetta Brook and Whitney? Good question.
It was indeed, as well as Aldo Rossi's Floating Theater, which I first saw at the Biennale. But yes, it was very much influenced by that. We also thought it was something that could happen over time. So part of what influenced us was creating something that could start now, but then grow organically. And then not everything needs to happen in phase one.
Are there other questions?
Can I just ask it?
Why don't you?
Okay. The scope of your work is astounding. And as innovators and problem solvers, have you ever been approached by think tanks or government offices to deal with larger social issues, solving those problems that don't necessarily involve design, but just innovative thinking?
We have, and the two examples I can give are thinking about reusing public space. And I think it's a very good question, because innovation and design, I think, needs to have a seat at the table in how cities are formed. And in fact, we're doing an exhibit right now for the Building Museum in DC that looks at the history of block play. And part of the reason I want to do that is to think about how design and how kids and how we play. Because the fact of the matter is, we've been invited to participate and lead various creative workshops. And if you watch how kids play, if you watch, in fact, one of the most interesting things with Imagination Playground is, since it was a partnership with Parks, our first play dates, we made a lot of the foam pieces ourselves, and we did test play dates. And you would see all of these grown-ups and educators, and we brought in Penny Wilson, who's a lead thinker in playgrounds. The playground is inspired by post-World War II, what were called adventure playgrounds in Europe, outside of London, where kids were making things out of anything they found by necessity. So we all stood around, all the grown-ups, and watched these kids, and of course the boys took the noodles and started fighting. And kids would start automatically making individual pieces. But then 15 minutes into it, every test play day, you would see kids look next to them and say, well, what if I connect my thing to theirs? And that notion of cooperation and community, is the city started to see it, created an opportunity for us to engage in a dialogue with a project we're now doing that's part of Hudson Yards. It's a cultural center called the Culture Shed, that is a museum or cultural center that can transform over time as well. So more and more, I think.
Are there any other questions? The person in the back, please.
Thank you, David, for that presentation. It's inspiring and inspired. I particularly like the what if section, because when people as creative as you and your team agree, it's really exciting. But often those are relegated to remaining as dreams. And I was struck by your 1800 seat scaffold-inspired theater.
Is there a question related?
It's coming up.
I like it, it's okay.
Which seems to both be practical, and there's a lot of theater that's talking about, from surface to light and inspired things to more portable theater. Are you being approached, or are you working with anybody where that might actually, in a smaller set, become practical?
We've spoken to a number of people, including, I think that Broadway, which is a community I love and am part of, is limited by the real estate. So I think you could argue Spider-Man, which seems to be doing okay, but wouldn't it be a freer creative experience if it weren't trapped by a Broadway theater? So we're talking to people around the world about portability, which is an interesting way to look at sustainability. Not everything needs to be permanent. And things that move have a kind of resting lightly on the earth point of view that's interesting. So there's not a direct client yet for the portable theater, but I'm very convinced that it makes sense, and we'll find someone who wants to do it. And we did speak early on, actually, to Julie Taymor, who's a friend, and the first producers of Spider-Man. And as Barbaralee mentioned, I'm producing my first show that I've been working on for 8 years, based on Houdini. We're, for all of my talking about not being trapped by a Broadway theater, we're going right into a big Broadway theater. But I also think, I don't know if you're aware of the Serpentine Gallery, but they do a great pavilion every year. And it's a different architect design pavilion.
PS1.
So does PS1, that's right. And have you seen the recent one? Pretty great.
Very cool and interesting.
Yeah. So we're thinking about it.
Although you are called an architect, define being the most creative people to work with, since not all of them are architects?
Well, we do our best to find people who are curious. And I think, you know, when I speak to architecture students, the thing that I think has been most life-giving for me is that the things I was curious about early on stayed relevant in my work. So we try and find people who are driven and curious, and there's one young person who works for me now who was an intern for 5 years. And we do exit interviews at the end of each year as an intern. I remember turning to him and saying, what job would you like, what do you want to do? And he said, I want your job. So I want people who want my job, and I want people who bring their own ideas and passion. And that's sometimes hard. I think when people work for other architecture firms, they're used to believing that there's a style or a school of thought that they need to subscribe to. So we like people to think out of the box. We have some great young talent, and we have some people, many people who've been with me 17, 18, 20 years who provide a kind of ballast. So I think it's the combination of the two.
Are there any? Yes?
So you've spoken about some of the things that have influenced your work. What about heroes, role models? People that have really influenced your development of your projects?
Well, that's a great question. One of my heroes is Jules Fisher, who's a Broadway lighting designer and a theater consultant, and now a friend. When I was 19, I reached out to him when I was doing a project at Syracuse on theater, and he's been a friend and an ally ever since. So that's a case where that's a hero I've actually gotten to work with. Early on as a student, Frank Lloyd Wright was certainly a hero of mine, remains a hero, primarily because of the kind of idiosyncratic nature of his work, the individual nature of his work. And Boris Aronson, as I mentioned, is a set designer. I think is one of the greatest designers of the 20th century. And interestingly, became a star at 60, right? He worked in the Russian theater and the Yiddish theater, and then came over here and did these great productions with Hal Prince. So I get to work with a lot of my heroes. I've got Liz Diller, who I'm working with now, is unbelievable. The whole firm, Rick Scafidio, Charles Renfro, it's a real privilege to work with them. Adrian Benepe is a hero of mine. I think his job with parks has been extraordinary. And I'm a huge fan, frankly, of the whole Bloomberg administration. And I think as a builder and as a designer, the amount of activity going on in New York right now is unparalleled and kind of amazing.
How about the last question?
He doesn't want to be the last question.
How about the next to last question?
It might be more towards an engineer or something like that, as the infrastructure of this country is, having lots of problems and challenges and so forth. Do you ever have thoughts, because I look at the playground, and to me what you created there probably is not a terribly expensive, all things considered, amazing project. Do you have any thoughts on, other than just simple engineering, bridges and roads and stuff? I live in Florida. It's ugly driving around and stuff.
Yeah.
Where your type of work could be somewhat combined with that.
Well, I think there's, the playground as an example is about $5,000 versus about $110,000 for a post and play playground. And we're partnered with Kaboom. I don't know if you know Kaboom, but they're a non-for-profit who's committed to having a playground within walking distance of every kid. What they're most known for is community-built playgrounds. So a community will go to Kaboom and say, we want a playground, and they'll come there, design it with you, and co-fundraise it with you. I think all the time about tunnels, for instance. I was in Yosemite last week with my family, and there were some amazing tunnels with really interesting lighting. So you know, I think where we could make the most unique contribution is in the reuse of buildings, like the 18th century building in Beacon, or the kind of amazing tunnels in London that are part of the old Vic that have now become a performance space. So I think it's bringing new life to existing spaces and not thinking of buildings as fungible or replaceable, but finding ways to breathe new life into them.
In spite of your emphasis on the impermanent, you've made and the transitory, you've made a permanent impression on all of us tonight. Thank you so much for your generous. Since tonight is the program that ends this Thursday's at 6:30 series, it has been unprecedented and gratifying. If you are interested in some of the speakers that have been mentioned, the parish is the 8th stop of this throughout New York City, New York State tour. You'll have the opportunity to not only see it again, but hear speakers such as the one that David has just mentioned, Liz Diller, and her topic when it comes to the New York Historical Society in December. Her topic will be the landmarks of tomorrow, Lincoln Center, the High Line, and the shed at Hudson Yards that David referred to. She is the architect of all three of them and a really astonishing architect and woman. So I hope you will join us someplace, somewhere again. But thank you for your wonderful support of this program. And thank you, David, for making such an important contribution to it. And to the parish and its staff, my thanks as well. Good night.